We need to confront the reality of what's been called China's brute force economics. We have to face up to the fact that we're not simply in competition with China, we're in a war.
If you take out the sector that we are the best at, there's really three sectors that we're pretty good at. One is biopharmaceuticals, the second is aerospace, and the third is software, AI, Google, Amazon, cloud services, all those information services. If you take out the information services sector, where we're dominant, we have about 38% of the global market, we go down to about 85. Our auto sector's about half of the global average. Our machines and electronics are about half of the global average. People don't realize how much we've hollowed out our advanced industries.
I think I read that China has more billionaires than we do.
Oh yeah, the Chinese, they say they're communists. It's not like communism the way the Soviets were, which was the apparatchiks had a nice car.
Yeah.
They don't mind billionaires as long as you're doing the business of advancing state power. The Alibaba billionaire, as Jack Ma started to say some things that the CCP didn't like, and he was punished, and everybody knew he was punished, and that was the signal. Don't criticize the CCP, and otherwise we'll let you make as much money as you want. At the same time, I do think we need to limit investment in critical infrastructure and technologies in China. That's very different than selling stuff that we make here and we want to sell to China. It's very different than investing in an advanced factory in China. That we have to really be thinking carefully about.
But you need people thinking about that who know a lot about the technology, how things are manufactured, what the supply chains are. You need somebody who's been in business or in technology to really understand that. And the problem I think we've got is we've got very few people here in Washington that have a clue. The United States has fallen well behind China and many other countries in our global share of key technology sectors. Our position in high-value products and services has fallen so dramatically that we now rank just above Italy and behind Mexico in the critical areas where the United States faces $250 billion trade deficit. These facts matter a lot. The Chinese Communist Party sees technology innovation as the main battlefield of its industrial policy and its ultimate weapon in achieving global dominance. It's well past the time for the United States to abandon the possibility that competing on a level playing field with China is possible. We need to confront the reality of what's been called China's brute force economics. We have to face up to the fact that we're not simply in competition with China, we're in a war. Welcome to the Bill Walton Show. I'm Bill Walton. Joining me today to explore these troubling trends is my returning guest and friend Robert D. Atkinson. Rob is founder and president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. He founded it in 2006, and it's now considered the world's top think tank for science and technology policy. Rob, welcome.
Bill, it's great to be back.
Yeah. Well, you said recently, we're not only below the global average, we're moving in the wrong direction. We've become almost a developing nation.
Pretty shocking. So what that study refers to is 7 key industries that every country has to, especially a big country like us, have to be good at. Things like aerospace, biotechnology, computing, semiconductors, machines, machine tools, things like that. And if you add all that up and say what share of our economy do those industries make up in terms of their sales or their output, and you compare that to the rest of the world, 85% of the GDP in the rest of the world that we can track, we're at about 0.95. So in other words, we're below average, or 5% below average. China's 35% above average. Germany's 60%.
They're 35% above?
Oh, yeah.
Is there anybody else, any other country remotely comparable to that?
Oh, yeah. There's a few that are better than China.
Okay.
So Taiwan,
all right.
because of semiconductors, and Korea. But they're doing, China's doing very, very well. We, on the other hand, and what's interesting about that number, if you take out the sector that we are the best at, There's really three sectors that we're pretty good at. One is biopharmaceuticals. We still invent and make drugs. The second is aerospace, which is a shorthand for Boeing, the world's top passenger jet maker. And the third is software, AI, Google, Amazon, cloud services, all those information services. If you take out the information services sector, where we're dominant, we have about 38% of the global market, we go down to about 0.85. So our auto sector's about half of the global average. Our machines and electronics are about half of the global average. People don't realize how much we've hollowed out our advanced industries.
Well, the part of the problem is our thinking about this, and I say this as a recovering unilateral free trader, free market guy. Let the market decide who's going to win and who's going to lose, and you'll get the best allocation of resources, and everybody will thrive. Well, that hasn't happened. And what's happened is if by not being selective about what industries we want to support as a country, we've let it all go to, we've let the critical stuff go to China. Yeah. And they don't think the way we think about free markets.
They don't have free markets.
Period.
And what people confuse them, well, they must be top-down Soviet Gosplan planners. No, they're not that.
Yeah.
They understand, they put this sort of magic connection together where they allow their companies a lot of freedom, but it's constrained. If you're going in the direction of the party, of the Communist Party, you get a lot of freedom and you get a lot of money. So they're way smarter than the Soviets were. And we have to recognize that. The other key point there is they don't look at this as Ricardian free trade. You know, David Ricardo, you know, we specialize in this and you specialize in that.
Comparative advantage.
Yeah.
That was 101.
Yeah. They look at it as absolute advantage for every major industry. That is their goal. And if you read their documents, it's straight up there. We want to be the global leader in every single one of these technologies. And global leader means crushing the competitors.
And they do support. I think you wrote that Huawei gets some $75 billion.
Yeah.
That's stunning.
That was a Wall Street Journal article that showed that they had received $75 billion. Think about that. The CHIPS Act we passed, which I think we should have done. I'm glad we did it because every other country, but particularly China's put in around $200 billion in subsidies for chip factories. So we put in 50, which is great. There'll be probably, I don't know how many, 40 companies that are competing for that. So, you know, maybe they're getting $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion. One company in China, $78 billion. How do you compete with that?
Well, so far, we're not.
Right. That is
the issue. So, what are the industries that they've achieved the most dominance in?
So, a study just came out recently. They have 20 times more shipbuilding capacity than we do.
Wow.
So think about if we're in a war. And the first thing that's going to happen in a war over Taiwan are going to be ships sinking, as awful as that is. And part of who survives is who can replace their ships. They'll replace their ships much more than we do. 20 years ago, they had almost no shipbuilding industry. The major shipbuilders were Japan and Korea. They've, I don't want to say decimated their shipbuilding industry, but they've shrank it very much.
Japan and Korea decimated theirs.
No, Japan and Korea were the leaders in the 2000s.
Okay, all right, then China's come on.
And then China came on from almost nowhere to now being the globally dominant.
Don't they have that one shipyard that produces as much as all of our shipyards combined?
Oh, yeah. Just one. So they've done that one. High-speed rail is another one. They had almost no high-speed rail, and their strategy was, we're going to build the world's largest high-speed rail network, but if you want to sell to us, you have to transfer and give us your technology. Lo and behold, you had a few companies that were hungry enough for short-term profits, shall we say, that they made the deal with the devil. And now they have their big, giant monopoly, what's called CRRC, China Rail Company, has 70% of the global market.
I'm curious, what's the key technologies that make for high-speed rail?
It's a combination of things. It's the actual way the motors are designed,
Okay.
but it's also the ability to design the wheels and the track system so you can go 250 miles an hour and not derail. Electronic systems that support all of that. So to your point, I think what your point is, these are technologies that aren't just very narrow. They have
Yeah, that
spillover
was my
effects.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is applicable to
yeah.
a lot of other things.
Absolutely. They're what we would call dual use technologies. They have a commercial use, but they have a military
And given
capability.
China's geographical size, having high-speed rails is a huge edge if they can get that in place.
They have it in place, and
It's the way the North won the Civil War.
well, yeah, you can move your troops. That's why the North won, because we had rail.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've done that. They've same. We talked about Huawei. They have the global. And it's funny because President Trump um, tried to slow down Huawei with export controls. And it was a good intention, but Huawei has the same global market share of 5G telecom equipment today than they did before the controls.
Quick thumbnail. What does Huawei produce? Because a lot of us don't really follow it that closely. What are their
So
products?
Huawei, when they were at their peak before the export, they were essentially the General Electric of the new era. So they made everything.
Mm-hmm.
They made their core business was telecom equipment. So when you get your cell phone and it connects to a tower, they would make the tower and the electronics for all of that and sell it all around the world. But they made laptops, they made consumer devices, they made phones. They were really into everything. But their main business, really the core business, is telecom equipment. And the worry with Huawei was that equipment wouldn't be secure, that there are back doors in it. So we banned Huawei equipment in the U.S., which was the good thing. And then we tried to put these export controls. Had no effect on them. The only effect was that American companies lost sales. So we didn't cripple Huawei with regard to telecom equipment. They have the same market share today than they had. And ZTE, the other competitor, actually has more market share. So, but now if you look at the ones they're trying to go after, robotics, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, they appear to be more or less at the same level that we are in quantum computing. Genomics, which is basically a biotechnology that's based upon gene manipulation. Aerospace, they have a state-owned enterprise called COMAC, Chinese something Aerospace Corporation, received billions and billions of dollars in subsidies, forced technology transfer from American and European companies, and now it is selling, or it's had commitments of sales of over 250 planes or so, not just in China. And these are single aisle 737 equivalents. But think about what that's going to do to Boeing. Because in a few years, Boeing will not, or Airbus, they won't be selling planes in China. And you think about building and designing a plane, the first plane costs a lot of money.
You need a big enough market to
Yeah.
cover your development costs.
Exactly right.
And,
And that market's
and
gonna
that's
shrink.
one of the ways they've won is that in many of these industries they've in effect shrunk the market
Yep.
so that you can't really sell into
Yep.
China, so therefore you're
Yep.
not big enough to compete elsewhere.
Exactly right. And they have this protected aircraft carrier, if you will, totally protected. They build up their market, they build up scale to cover their development costs, and then they go out to these other countries, massively subsidized with their export financing. And the whole goal, and this is why it's so important to understand, the whole goal is to take that profitable part of your business that you've paid off your development costs, now you're selling everything's gravy. Their whole goal is to take that away so that you can't invest very much in the next round and the Chinese invest more. And then the round after that, you're out of business.
Is this well, there are three or four. I've got so many different way to take this. I mean, you mentioned at the outset this is not the Soviet-style top-down, 5-year plan type economy. How do they? And I had Bob Lighthizer on, trade representative, and he believes, and I think I've come to this view, there are no truly private companies in China. I mean, they're mostly public or private, but not really. And the big ones have all got somebody from the Chinese Communist Party either on the board or involved in
Actually,
management.
even the middle-sized ones now
Even the middle
have a CCP representative.
Well, how do they maintain the knock against that was, well, you get the government, hold it once, This is the Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Rob Atkinson, who's one of our great thinkers about technology and information services and China, America's position in the world. And we're talking about China and how China can be competitive with free market companies that are, working here in the United States with a top-down Soviet, Chinese communist style leadership. I don't know. I was an elegant way to say it, but how does it work? I mean, you've got the party sitting in the room, you've got the entrepreneur in the room. How do they work together?
So what the party does through lots of different vehicles, including what's called the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, is they set targets, they set goals. So they say, I'll give you a good example. They said we should be the dominant player in the printer industry. So, you have your printer, you got your laptop, you want to print out some paper and print something. So they had a firm, and the firm was being sued by Lexmark and HP, the two major printer companies in the world, both American. They were being sued for patent violation. So their printer head, which is the most complex part of that, they had stolen it. They weren't going to win because they were being sued in Chinese court. You never win those cases. So the Chinese government they sent a letter to this company, I can't remember the name of the company, said, we want you to go out and buy a foreign printer company to become the globally dominant printer company in the world, and here's $3.5 billion. They then went and bought Lexmark. Lexmark shareholders were ecstatic because they paid something like 35-40% over market price.
Mm-hmm.
So, Bill, if you're the shareholder and somebody says, we're going to sell the company and you're going to get 40% premium, like, why wouldn't you do that? So they end up buying this company, and now they're a globally dominant printer company. Now, imagine that going step after step, industry after industry. So the government doesn't get in the hair of this company and say, you decided you wanted to use this different color ink. They don't get in the business like that. It's much higher level and strategic.
Well, the Soviets set production quotas.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to make X number of these things,
Yeah.
and that's your number, regardless of market demand or price.
Right. The Chinese never do that. They learned their lesson from the Soviets. They never do that. The allocation in China is market-based. The production is state-influenced. That's, I think, the way to look at it.
I think I read that China has more billionaires than we do.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Chinese, they say they're communists. It's not like communism the way the Soviets were, which was, the apparatchiks had a nice car.
Yeah.
They don't mind billionaires as long as you're doing the business of advancing state power. You're fine. That's what happened to Jack Ma, the Alibaba billionaire. As Jack Ma started to say some things that the CCP didn't like, and he was punished, and everybody knew he was punished, and that was the signal. Don't criticize the CCP, and otherwise we'll let you make as much money as you want.
So they don't need to use a heavy hand everywhere. They just pick somebody out, make them an example of this can happen to you.
Right, exactly. And they do the same to us. So I'll give you an example. There's one of our leading computer chip companies, a company called Micron, which is out of Idaho. And it was actually the venture funding of Micron, believe it or not, came from the potato magnate Simplot.
Well, Idaho, sure.
Yeah, they had a lot of money. The guy had a lot of money. He's going, what am I going to do with my money if
Sure.
potatoes are growing? Yeah. So he funds Micron. Micron's this great company. There's three major memory chip companies in the world. Two are Korean, one is American.
Yeah.
Micron made the mistake of criticizing the Chinese because they had stolen Micron technology. Guess what happened? The Chinese government banned all Micron, most Micron products being sold in China. So that's not just the punishment of Micron. That is a shot across the bow of every American company.
Anybody selling into China has got to see that and say,
just keep your mouth shut. Don't bring a WTO case. Don't have the government do anything. Just shut up.
how do we think about I think we have almost $2 trillion invested in China from largely U.S.-based companies, but also European companies from all over the world. And when we think about our business with China, it's not like we're all over here in the United States and we're exporting and whatever. We're in China. And you look at a company like Apple. I don't think Apple could exist without China because everything's manufactured. So it seems like if we If we want to get tough with China, we're also getting tough on ourselves because we've got all that money invested there.
So this conundrum that is basically increasing China power and increasing dependence of America on China didn't happen overnight. The reason it happened is it was very gradual. They built up these ecosystems, and so they built up these manufacturing ecosystems so powerful that you have to be there. It's a black hole of force that's drawing everybody in there, and so trying to reverse that, you can't do it in a
So if
year.
I'm running a tech company in Palo Alto or wherever, and I need to be in China because of the resources or the technology I have there, or is it
Well,
something
it
else?
depends. Number one, if you want to sell in China,
Yeah.
I mean, look at what Tesla did. Tesla wanted to sell in China, so Tesla had to build a giant, incredibly modern factory in China. You know what the deal was with Tesla? You build this factory, and we'll give you subsidies. We don't mind. But the deal is you have to have almost all of your suppliers Chinese firms, and you have to train them and teach them. So that's what Tesla did. And their supplier base got so sophisticated that now they're supplying Geely and all these other Chinese electric vehicle companies who now are the largest electric vehicle producer in
And
the world.
Tesla's losing its market in China
Yes.
to these Chinese companies that are using the technology developed and manufactured for Tesla.
Right.
That's how it works.
Yeah, and it was obvious. They let American companies in for a temporary reason. They're not like, so when we let sort of Siemens come in and build a factory here, it's like permanent because, hey, Siemens is going to help our economy. Or when we go and build a factory in Germany, it's temporary for them. It's like, I want to take as much of your capabilities, and once I've sucked that out of you, we don't need you anymore.
And that's a time frame. One of the issues that we have, and I'm having been unfortunate enough or fortunate enough to run a public company, it's ridiculous. You've got this 90-day window where every quarter you get to report to your shareholders how you're doing.
Right.
And it's a crazy system because you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, yeah, I mean, stuff has happened in the last 90 days, but nothing that's very strategic and nothing that's going to require, detailed. And yet that's the game we're, and also I'm measured by my investors and whether my earnings went up or down 2 or 3 cents.
Right.
So we've got this incredibly narrow time frame that we're measured by, and also infinitesimal differences in outcome. A few pennies a share doesn't really matter one way or the other, but the market reacts to it in a way that can really punish you.
Right.
China doesn't have that issue.
No.
So their time frame, you say take time to develop, that could be 5 to 10 years.
It could be 20 years.
Okay.
So Comac, it'll be probably a 20-year money loser, minimum. Now, why isn't it gone out of business? Because the government just takes a wheelbarrow full of yuan and drives it up to the corporate headquarters and dumps it out.
Okay. So they're real. Life is good if you're a billionaire in China.
Exactly.
Government's going to help.
Long as you keep your mouth shut.
Well, there's a, so if we're, again, you're giving me so much stunning information. I'm losing my train of thought here. Oh, I know where I wanted to go. Pharma. You said China is dominant, or U.S. is dominant in pharma. Well, don't we also now have an example of Merck building $1 billion R&D facility just outside Beijing? Aren't we in effect moving a lot of our pharma to China?
So one of the things, Bill, that I find most frustrating in Washington in this debate, it's like if every time you decide you wanted to go somewhere, you go outside and I hit you in the head with a baseball bat, and you go, you know what, I'm going to try it again because what happened in the past, who cares?
Maybe they'll miss this time.
Maybe they'll miss. So they did this in telecom equipment. They did it in solar panels. We had 60% of the solar panel market in 2000. We have 5%. China has 70%. They do it in industry after industry, and American companies think this time's different. So why is Merck or other companies doing that? I don't blame them for doing what they're doing because China is the fastest growing drug market in the world. What China says is if you want to sell us your drugs, if you want to be on the formulary, to have your drug prescribed, you have to build a factory here. Now, that's a complete violation of the World Trade Organization rules, but if you're a CEO, what are you supposed to do? And this is where I think, again, the government, the state has to come in and protect our companies from having to make that Hobson's choice.
Well, we don't.
We don't.
I mean, I think I'm trying to you help me out, but the Treasury Department has a group inside of it called CFIUS,
Right.
which tracks investment in the United States. And originally that was mainly for national security purposes, as investing in key technologies or industries that would be a threat to us. Now there's a more economic focus, but it's still primarily national
Right.
security driven.
Right.
And on the flip side, we're not doing anything, as far as I'm aware of, to track what's invested in China.
Correct.
We have no. If I thought the federal government were competent, I'd be more concerned. I don't think it particularly is, but it needs to be.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going on in China.
Right.
We meaning people in Washington that ought to be thinking about grand strategy.
We don't. Yeah. So first of all, on CFIUS,
probably you do.
It's striking. I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day who knows a lot about a particular industry, and he was telling me that the Pentagon called him up and asked him this question, which we're both like, so if you kind of know something, I won't say what the question was, but it was like just like, yeah, I can't really believe you asked that question. That was a question. It was so basic, you should know that. So to your point about how much capabilities the government have, it's not enough. Point with CFIUS, there's basically not an American company, at least in an important industry, that can go to China and not invest without a forced JV, joint venture.
Joint venture.
Why would we ever allow a Chinese company to invest in this country? Because we don't require joint ventures. So I'm all for CFIUS. I love it, but it needs to get beyond its military focus and just simply say no more Chinese investment in the U.S.
Well, you occupy an unusual spot in this whole debate because you've worked with every administration going back in the first Bush administration and then Obama
Clinton.
and then Clinton. So
yeah.
you've worked, and the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, quick plug. This is Bill Walton Show, and I'm here with Rob Atkinson, who's founder of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, which I've come to realize is probably the leading think tank that big companies and the U.S. government looks to for answers to questions about what's really going on with investment in technology around the world. And so you're consulted by everybody. Think about it. Put yourself in the position of a typical corporate CEO, and I was one of those typical guys. You typically don't have the staff to analyze something in the way your group does. I mean, I want to do a quick dive into how you operate that gives you such insight into what's going on.
There's two kinds of think tanks, if you will. One are based upon sort of area, our focus is Europe or this or particular broad areas. We're really organized around much more around technology verticals. So we know telecom, wireless, wireline in depth. We know biopharmaceutical industry in depth. We know advanced manufacturing in depth. We know electronics, IT, semiconductors, AI in depth. So that's, I think, frankly, if you figuring out the policy is easy. Understanding the technology and the industry structure and the dynamics is a lot harder. And so if you don't have that, it's harder to sort of make sense of what's going on. So that's what we try to focus on.
And so as we think about looking forward, when you and I talked 4 years ago, and I don't know how so much time slipped by because I learned so much when you come on. China was seen as a brutal competitor, but not necessarily an enemy. And there were a whole lot of people in the country that thought, well, if we just integrate and do more with China, we'll live happily together and move on. Now, China's intentions have been revealed to almost everyone.
Yeah.
And so when you go about doing what you're doing and talking with people about what we ought to be doing with China, what's the state of play?
So a couple things. One, we're going to look back on this and I think historians will say Xi Jinping made a huge mistake. There was a famous line that Deng
Yeah.
Xiaoping had, which was, hide your light and bide your time.
Yeah.
And why did he want to do that? Because he didn't want to give away the game. He didn't want to really say what the Chinese were doing, which was by 2049, their 100-year anniversary, when they took over China in a violent revolution, that their game was to dominate the world, including through technology and economics. Xi Jinping sort of put that out too soon. And so he got a lot of push, and there's now global pushback against what he's doing. He would have been way smarter. Just keep doing what he's doing. Don't say anything. Keep quiet. And he would have had another 10 years before people woke up. Now they've woken up. The problem is that there are people in Washington who will mouth that China's a problem, China's a challenge. But in their heart of hearts, they're like, well, if he leaves, maybe we'll get back to normal. Maybe there'll be a Western reformer. That's not going to happen. This is the Western reformers. It was always a means, not an end. They had reform strategies because they thought it would get them ahead. Now Xi Jinping has more of an authoritarian, techno-authoritarianism because he thinks it's going to gain power. The other big mistake we make in the U.S. is, we evaluate economic policy on, does it lead to overall increase in economic welfare? Does it grow your GDP? China doesn't care about that. That's not what's going on there. What's going on there is, does it lead to power? And that's a very different calculus. And so everybody says, oh, the Chinese economy is tanking and all that. Yeah, again, they'd rather it not tank. But as long as they're proceeding to win the battle, the war of these advanced industries, then you have, so finally, in the U.S., I would say in Washington, there's now a growing consensus that China's a problem. But what we lack are, I think, two things. One is we don't have a strategy. There's no strategy about how should we go about doing this. Case in point is semiconductors. So we passed a law called the CHIPS Act. We give these companies incentives to build these very expensive factories for making computer chips because these other countries are giving them big incentives. But at the same time, we're not allowing American companies to sell some computer chips to China that they already can make.
So why bother?
Why bother?
Yeah.
I mean, I get you want to, there are choke points we have, fine, but not selling computer chips that they already can get, what have we done? We've just cut ourselves off.
Well, we talked about this before we got on the air, but you talk about a camp that you just mentioned before, which is the people that, well, yeah, things are tough now, but you'll go out of power and we can get back to doing business as usual. And I count among that a lot of my old friends on Wall Street and the banking business who, J.P. Morgan and BlackRock and, DeLeo at Bridgewater.
Right,
and they all want, this is going to pass. We're going to go back. I mean, Steve Schwarzman's funding Schwarzman scholars in Beijing. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars of personal money in the country.
Right.
So they've not only got a business attachment, but a personal attachment to it.
Yeah.
They want all this to go away.
Yeah, and Paulson, the same way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hank Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, made a fortune in China. Yeah. And still does.
Yeah.
He's not conflicted, not at all. Or there's a whole list of people. I won't mention them all. So you've got that group. And then you've got the other side, which, I have a lot of friends in this camp. China's terrible. China's evil. China is going to, come after us. They're going to invade Taiwan and create a cataclysm there. We had to cut off all relationships with China, shut everything down, and isolate them, and that's the way we'll win. I don't think that, but I'm thinking that based on kind of less information than you have. You don't think that either.
First of all, the key thing of thinking about China is not to get all wrapped up in emotion, but is to be in the foreign policy world. There's a term in foreign policy of being a realist. So there's idealist foreign policy, which are, our values. I just wrote a long article on why we need foreign economic policy grounded in realism. And what I meant by that.
The title, and where is it?
It's I can get you the title, but it's in a journal here in D.C. called the International Economy. The name of the journal is
okay.
The International
We'll put
Economy.
We'll put it on. We'll get it.
And it was called A Realist Approach to Economic. And what I meant by that was, we should be thinking about our interactions with China only one lens. How do we slow them down, and how do we speed us up? Everything else is irrelevant. So selling Tide detergent or Starbucks or Kentucky Fried Chicken, first of all, it's marginal, but at the end of the day, I want their money. I want their money. Um, Same thing with selling them commodity computer chips. If you look at the export control regime the Biden administration came out, one of the justifications for it was because you can use some of these technologies for facial recognition systems. We're not going to stop the Chinese from oppressing certain populations, or we're not going to turn them into an enlightened democracy. Why would we hurt our companies? It's the same thing where you say, well, we should not let Google go in. I would love Google to go in because I want them to take market share from Baidu, their major search engine.
Mm-hmm.
I want to take Chinese money because the less money they have is less that they can reinvest into their system. So we just have to be careful. At the same time, I do think we need to limit investment in critical infrastructure and technologies in China. That's very different than selling them stuff that we make here and we want to sell to China. It's very different than investing in an advanced factory in China. That we have to really be thinking carefully about.
But you need people thinking about that who know a lot about the technology, how things are manufactured, what the supply chains are. You need somebody who's been in business or in technology to really understand that. And the problem I think we've got is we've got very few people here in Washington that have a clue.
That's correct. That's correct.
I mean, the CHIPS Act's a great example. You've got all these people making these legislation, these staffers in the Hill writing this, that, and the other thing, all of them with lobbyists looking over their shoulder, maybe 3 or 4 of every line they write so that they make sure they get what they want in each bill. It's a mess. It's a mess.
I think the one thing with...
Okay, you're closer to it than I am.
Yeah.
Maybe not that big. I think from here it looks like a mess.
There's 2 things with the CHIPS Act. One, there were a number of Republicans, and there would have been more if there wasn't for political. There are a number of Republicans who went out on a limb and said, look, we need to... Senator Cornyn, for example, a Texan, a Republican,
Sure.
Senator Todd Young in Indiana. And they did this because of national security. There's no question if we go to war with Taiwan, if they wanted to cut off Taiwan chip exports to us for use, it would make COVID look like child's play.
Yeah.
So we have to do it. The question, and the only way we're going to do it, frankly, is just capital subsidies. That's what all these other countries do. You just have to say, you want to build a $15, $20 billion fab? We'll give you $3 billion. The state of Texas will give you $2 billion, and we'll help train your workers.
So to do it more like the Chinese do it, we're not talking about an industrial policy that's directed by people in an office in Washington. We're really talking about allocating venture capital.
Yeah, investment capital.
Not getting into how the companies are run or
so
tech.
The problem, I think, is what the administration has done is at the end of the day, the most important thing for the Biden administration, if you ask me, is an equity agenda. And they used the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act, and they infused it with their equity agenda. So, for example, we're mandated daycare centers.
Oh, God.
At the end of the day, it's a minor little irritant, but are you kidding me?
Oh, you mean equity meaning DEI, that equity?
Yeah.
The whole of government equity agenda, which is put this whole thing on top of.
Yeah. Yeah, not equity like in capital. No,
No,
DEI.
I was thinking my venture. I was
No.
Okay,
No,
equity.
that kind of equity. No.
I was talking
The other kind of equity.
Money.
Yeah.
Oh, DEI equity.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's a catastrophe.
Yeah, you have to use union labor. Like, there's another one, you couldn't do stock buybacks.
Yeah.
Look, if you don't like stock buybacks, fine, we can have some tax rule for it, but you don't impose these social policy things on your core industrial policy initiative.
Yeah.
They're 2 different things. And that, I think, has upset, and rightly so, a number of Republicans. I think if we try to do this again, it wouldn't pass this time because a lot of Republicans feel burned. Like, hey, we did this. We took a risk because, our party's sort of free market. We took a risk because we wanted to make sure that our national security was protected, and the administration politicized it.
Then infused it with the whole DEI equity agenda.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, if you go on the Treasury website and look at their strategic goals that Janet Yellen set for the Treasury. It's the DEI equity agenda.
Yeah.
And climate change,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. The term I use is green equity.
Green equity. Okay, I like that. That gets the whole. I like that. That captures the whole agenda right there.
That is it.
2 words. Green.
That is it.
Green equity.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I look, I'm not. It's not like having, higher wages for workers or better clean energy innovation. Cool. But at the end of the day, you have to pick your battles. What's the most important thing facing our country in the future? And it's the China competition. It's not these other issues.
Well, the DEI agenda gets in the way of something that you and I've talked about, which is the notion of a meritocracy. And when you get the DEI screen put in everything, you tend not to look at things or people based on their merit. And we need the best and the brightest in these things, and we can't really have categories of people that have to have jobs. We need to have categories of people who are brilliant and get things done.
So, Bill, it's interesting you say that because back in the 80s, when we faced the Japanese-German challenge, big challenge, people forget that was a serious challenge. One of the reasons why we won is because you had a bipartisan Congress combined with Ronald Reagan and Bush, and they supported a whole set of policies like the R&D tax credit. But one of the things that came out of that era was this movement to create specialized math and science high schools around the country. Because the realization was if we don't have the best kids going into math, science, engineering, we're going to lose to the Japanese. So we created a whole bunch of them, including one here in Northern Virginia, near where we are now, called Thomas Jefferson. Incredible high school. But to get into Thomas Jefferson, you had to pass a test. You had to be the best and the brightest. And most of those kids ended up being Asian, either Southeast Asian, Southern Asian from India or China or other countries, where their parents come here and they're like, hey, you got to work hard. No video games tonight for you. After the whole George Floyd thing in the movement, the county changed that, and now it's a lottery.
Oh, my.
Look, the purpose of that school is to get the best kids, funnel them into this program to teach them the best so they can go on to be the best scientists and engineers in our country.
Well, we had Amy Chua on last week, who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother and all about the Confucius model of parenting. And, they study, I don't know how many hours are in the week, but that's about how many hours they study. And she had a saying in the book we clipped out. Sarah did a cartoon about it. And she wanted her daughters to be concert violinists and pianists. And she said, every minute you're not practicing is a minute you're getting worse.
Yeah, that's the attitude.
Which I thought was terrific.
Yeah.
But that's not going to let you win the lottery. I mean,
right.
So that whole notion of merit, then that's swept across all of government, a lot of big businesses.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's certain things that are, in my view, that are so important. And winning the techno-economic race with China is that we have to have a program of not of equity, of merit. We have to try to get the best people to be focused on that. That doesn't mean that some of those people won't be diverse. It's not at all that. But you have to have merit be the driving force.
Well, I want to wind up with that, with you explaining what we ought to put in place. But before we do that, I want to get to the question that I worry about, which is Taiwan. China, Chinese Communist Party designs on Taiwan. Taiwan is the semiconductor capital of the world. We depend on it. They depend on it. The island is not susceptible to traditional, sending your troops to the beach and taking it over. There are no beaches in Taiwan, at least on the side that they'd want to attack from. How do you see that playing out? And did the Chinese understand that going to war and destroying Taiwan would destroy themselves, or how do they win their crown jewel that they're looking for?
So I give you a little bit of my opinion, and it's only that because I focus really on industry and technology. And I have colleagues, I'm on this Eric Schmidt-funded thing called the Special Competitive Studies Program.
Who is the CEO of Google?
Yeah, the CEO. But I really respect what Eric's doing. He's he really sees China as the central threat, the pacing threat, as they would say.
Hmm.
And he's organized this high-level commission with a group focused on military, a group focused on intelligence, and then the group I'm on is techno-economic competition. So I hear these folks talking about this, so I can't really say anything. I don't think there's any question that China sees Taiwan as rightfully theirs. I think the only question is, will they just sort of wait until Taiwan gets tired, or will they use force? And I don't think we know the answer to that. But I certainly wouldn't preclude. I think we should be prepared for them to use force. I don't know what the odds are. Some people say it's by the end of the decade they're likely to do it. The Chinese are irrational about this topic. It would be like if the Mexicans invaded New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be pretty irrational about it. It's our country. Get the heck out. That's how they feel, and not correctly in my view. But that's
Well, it
how they
almost
feel.
doesn't matter what I think about it. It does matter. I think we're on the air or not, but you said that if something happened in Taiwan, it'd be talk about things being shut down. COVID would be nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we would go black basically.
Well, we would. What would happen? The lights would still work, your computer would still work, but producing all these things that we need, there'd be this massive shortage, and you're talking 3 years. Now, the good news, I think, is that the CHIPS Act, there's concrete being poured as we speak, and there's going to be a lot more concrete being poured. If we can wait 5 years, we should have a good buffer of ability to produce in the U.S.
So what ought we to put in place to bring about the things that we ought to bring about?
I think there's really 2 or 3 main things. Number one, we talked earlier, Bill, you had exactly the right point, which is you got to find a way to pay for your development costs. We have to limit China's ability to get that money back. And the way to do it, I've been working with folks up on the Hill. Hopefully we can get a legislation. There's a program we passed in 1930, and it gave the U.S. International Trade Commission the ability to block imports for 10 years. It's called Section 337. And unfortunately, there's a lot of problems with it, but you could easily fix it and I laid out in a report all the legislative fixes you could do. I was talking to the CEO of a pretty major, probably $4 billion company in the Midwest. And I was speaking to a group of manufacturers, and I mentioned this program. He said, "Oh, yeah, we were facing a Chinese competitor who had stolen our trade secrets. They were selling into the market. And we used this Section 337. It cost me $10 million, he said, but we got a 10-year exclusion order. And in other words, the Chinese company cannot sell into the U.S. for 10 years because they had stolen this company's intellectual property and was competing unfairly. We need to ratchet that program up.
That would work. That would work.
Yeah.
It's simple.
Yeah. I'll give you another example. Caterpillar, the heavy equipment maker. 15 years ago, there were no Chinese companies in the top 10 in making heavy construction equipment. Now there are 3. They're all state-backed. They're all subsidized. And to your point earlier, it's essentially a closed market. So the foreign companies can't make any money. And they're selling in the U.S. as we speak. I would never let those companies sell in the U.S. So we need to do that. We need to do that with our allies. So in other words, just cut off their ill-gotten gains, if you will. And the second thing we need to do, we just need to do a better job of helping American companies. We have now the 32nd worst R&D tax credit in the world. When Reagan and Clinton were in office, it was number 1. So when companies spend money on R&D, we should give them better credit. One of the things that happened, as you're well aware of, Bill, in the 2018 Tax Act that President Trump championed, there was a really good provision in there, and it allowed companies to write off in their first year capital expenditures. You buy a $100 million machine, you can write it off. That's gone away. Craziest thing. We should just immediately restore that. So we want our companies to be investing in real capital equipment as well as R&D, and the tax code just makes that harder. So that's what we could do.
Is there a third one?
There's a third one, which is we should do a much better job of helping pre-competitive, early stage collaborative research with industries, with working with universities. So we have a program called Manufacturing USA Institutes, and they're a great system, and they're company-led. The government puts in money, but the companies have to put their own cash on the table. So there are various universities around the country, things like lightweight materials, making biotech products without bad, like biotech drugs are made like beer, a big vat. And the next big thing is, can you make them like a chemical factory, flow?
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. So there's a consortium to try to do that. We need to do a lot more of that. The Chinese copied our program. They copied our program. It was our idea. We have 15 centers. They have 30, and they're funding them 10 times more than we
So
are.
university research
With industry partners.
with industry, partly funded by the federal government.
Correct. Not all funded. You don't want the government to fund it all.
Just some.
Some.
So we can actually accomplish all three of those things. I mean, I think of so many things we think, well, we ought to do this, but you're never going to get a bipartisan majority to do that. I think you ought to be able to do that.
Absolutely. All three. All three. And you know, the biggest here, I'll tell you, here's the biggest barrier to all three. It's OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office. I'll give you an example. We did an analysis of the research and development tax credit. And what happens when you do the R&D tax credit, companies spend more on R&D. Logical. We're giving you a tax break, so you're going to spend more. And all the studies show that. When they spend more on R&D, output goes up, productivity goes up. After 15 years, because every dollar of added output, 20 cents goes to the federal government, just GD,
Sure.
federal.
Yeah, yeah.
After 15 years, the R&D tax credit pays for itself. But the CBO window is 5 years.
So we've got some accountants,
Yeah.
and I say that as a former recovering accounting major. They're saying, no, we can't go at 15 years.
Yeah.
That's too long a horizon.
Yeah, but the U.S. can go 50 years. We're not a company that has capital shortages, and we have a budget problem, but we should be budgeting for 15 years like that.
Well, I love, finally, after many, many shows, not with you, with other people, I say, what are good lines of action? We finally have three we could actually do.
Yeah. The first one costs no money.
Even better.
Here, I'll give you an example. And Bob Lighthizer, I know, has talked about this. I'll give you in that thing. If you want to bring one of these 337 cases, you have to show that you've actually suffered material harm as a company. So there was a company in Illinois called Illinois Tool Works. Same issue, facing two Chinese competitors, stolen their IP, unfairly competing. They brought a 337 case. They won the first part, which was to say, yes, this is completely unfair, but they didn't win an exclusion order because the Chinese were taking the growth of the market. This company's sales were stagnant, so they didn't suffer material harm. What planet are we living on?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So just change that. Congress could change that.
I'm glad they're still
tomorrow.
around. I used to be their banker 45 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
They may not be long.
I know. Oh, my God, what bad thinking is keeping us from doing the right thing. Well, Rob, thank you. This is
Bill,
great.
my pleasure. As always,
I wanted to keep this show bite-sized because I want to have you back because there are about 53 things we didn't get to explore. This has been the Bill Walton Show. I've been here with Rob Atkinson, who's founder of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, which is the go-to shop if you want to understand technology and entrepreneurship and how to protect American wealth creation. I guess that's one way to put it. Anyway, thanks for joining. And as always, you can find all of our shows on all the major podcast platforms and on YouTube and Rumble, Substack, and we're also now on CPAC. We're on CPAC now on Monday nights. Please subscribe. Go to the Substack site and subscribe to the show. And if you have some like-minded friends that want to learn about complicated things and understand what we can actually do about it, this is the show to be watching. So anyway, thanks for joining, and we'll be back with you soon. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Want more? Click the subscribe button or head over to thebillwaltonshow.com to choose from over 100 episodes. You can also learn more about our guest on our Interesting People page. and send us your comments. We read every one, and your thoughts help us guide the show. If it's easier for you to listen, check out our podcast page and subscribe there. In return, we'll keep you informed about what's true, what's right, and what's next. Thanks for joining.